hate army, bro.
Shut up for hate.
Really, there's only one news story that I wanted to cover today. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, yeah. So this, I mean, not necessarily that this is news, okay? I'll say it's news just for the sake of saying it's a news segment, but really it's not. So if y'all remember, in early 2023, there was a little bit of a remake game, and there was a lot of controversy around it. It was called the Dead Space remake. Now, the reason this game had controversy around it is because the original makers of Dead Space, Visceral Games, had actually been laid off and fired by EA. So they went off and decided they were going to make their own studio, and they were going to make their own survival horror game that was kind of like an homage or a spiritual successor to Dead Space, because there were no other Dead Space games. Dead Space had been defunct for like a decade, and no one was making new ones. So they go off to do that. And as they're developing this game, which ended up being called Callisto Protocol, okay? At the same time, EA decides, oh, we're going to remake Dead Space. And it's like, what? Like, why are you doing that? The only reason you're doing that is to compete with the former studio that you fired because you feel stupid. You own the IP, right? But now they want to do their own thing because you fired them, and now you want to bring back the games that they were making after you've already fired the dev team. Isn't that kind of messed up? And the answer is, yeah, it is. It's incredibly dumb that happened, and it's kind of messed up and disrespectful to the game devs, in my opinion. Okay, so what ended up happening was Callisto Protocol came out, I believe it was December 2022. And I'll be honest with everyone, it's not a perfect game, but it's a good game. The plot is interesting and scary and fun. The characters are well developed. The gameplay elements are very different from Dead Space, and that's what made people upset. Because when Callisto Protocol came out, people went into it with the expectation that they wanted Dead Space 4. But Callisto Protocol is not Dead Space 4. It's a game where guns aren't very effective, and you need to learn this new melee mechanic system to survive. It's very, very set apart from in Dead Space, where it's all about guns. Melee is shit, right? It's kind of the opposite. And by the way, it's tough. It's a tough game. You need to master this system, and if you don't, you get your ass handed to you over and over. Now, admittedly, the game has flaws. There's some graphical problems. It's a shorter game. There's one or two things that are more frustrating. Okay? So I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, the game's perfect. But overall, it's a fine survival horror game. Okay? But the critics panned the shit out of the game, saying it was an awful game. Why? Because they're fucking terrible at the game. They didn't want to learn a new survival horror element or engine. They just wanted it to be Dead Space or Resident Evil or whatever. And since it didn't play like that, they all sat there and bitched and moaned. There were content creators who booted the game up and quit within 2 hours, saying they couldn't figure it out or it was too hard. On stream, they quit the game. It's like, what are you, a pussy? It's a fucking game. You're supposed to learn how to play it. Isn't this what you're supposed to do when you're a gamer? I mean, really, it makes me scratch my head like, what happened that all this negativity got thrown against the game? And me, I played it. Yeah, did I have frustrating parts? Yeah, I did. For sure I did. There was one or two parts I raged much later in the game, but I didn't give up and I persevered, and overall I had a great time with the game. I don't get it. I don't get that the bad reception that the game got. It doesn't make sense. It's not equivalent with the experience that I had. Okay? Anyway. The reason I bring this up is because the Dead Space remake came out a month later. In January, okay? And all the critics praised the shit out of it. They said, oh my God, it's such a great game. It brings back the Dead Space franchise. This is it. Dead Space is back, right? So I played it, okay? Now, to be fair, the Dead Space remake is fun. It's a very fun game. It's got good graphics. It's got sound gameplay elements. It's got a lot of good stuff. Problem is, most of the good stuff was already done. It's from Visceral Games. It's the stuff from the original game that makes this game feel so good. It does have improvements. For example, I got hair in my mouth. Ugh, got it. For example, now the Ishimura ship is all connected. You can actually go throughout the ship and find hidden doors and areas that weren't present in the original game to get upgrades and some additional lore and stuff in the game. That's cool. There's areas that now implement mechanics from Dead Space 2. Like there's a few anti-grav rooms where you can kind of jetpack around and do stuff. You couldn't do that in the original game. They've changed that and added that into this game. So did they try to innovate? A little bit. Just not a lot. Most of the game is identical to the original Dead Space game with a facelift. There's a few elements that make it new, but for the most part, it's the same exact game. Okay? So the critics praise it. Oh my god, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, best survival horror game ever. It's like, wait, what? It's fucking Dead Space 1. Did you not play Dead Space 1? And maybe that's what it is. Maybe the reviewers around today are fucking 20, 30-year-olds and never played the original Dead Space, perhaps? Because you would know it's the same game if you played the original. You would fucking know it's just they copied 99% of the stuff. So they praise the shit out of the game. All right? Guess what? If we're to believe this industry insider guy, Jeff Grubb, because he seems to always have inside info on the industry on his podcast, this morning on his podcast, he says there will be no further Dead Space remakes whatsoever. 0. The franchise is re-dead. So it was dead after Dead Space 3 for a decade. To compete and try to outshine Callisto Protocol, they remade Dead Space 1, and now it's dead again. It's completely defunct. They have no plans to do anything with it. You might say, wait a minute. Why? Why on earth would it be canceled? Like, when we were playing the Dead Space remake and I finished it, everyone was like, would you play a Dead Space 2 remake? And I said, yeah, I would. This remake was fine. It's certainly not as good as the critics say, but it was a fine game. I had fun with it. I would play a Dead Space 2 remake or even a Dead Space 3 remake. I would play those. Okay? Well, they're not making them at all. 0. You might say, why? Why are they not doing it? Because the Dead Space 1 remake only sold about 1 million copies. Despite all the PR nonsense from every fucking game journalist shilling the fuck out of this game, saying it was the best game ever, and for some reason, them all yelling and screaming that Callisto Protocol sucked, so buy Dead Space Remake instead. The game only sold about 1 million copies, which wasn't enough to make a significant profit for EA, so they deemed that the remake projects were not worthy, and they scrapped them all, and they're done with Dead Space, likely forever. Like, at this point, I think they're never going to make another Dead Space. I think it's it. It's done. Which is sad, because the franchise is great, and Visceral Games did an outstanding job with that franchise when it was in their hands. And now EA, it's their fault. They fucked it up. They're the ones who decided not to make any more. They're the ones who fired Visceral Games. They're the ones who then kind of made Callisto Protocol tank by making a remake to directly compete with that. And now they've shut down Dead Space again. It's like, wow, EA is just fucking atrociously bad, aren't they? It really sucks, because a publisher like EA used to be good for this kind of stuff. Like, they did variety shit. But I think, sadly, what it is these game companies now have more become about this than anything else. So what's making EA its most money? Sports games and live service games with constant microtransactions, Ultimate Team and dumb shit like that. That's what prints money for them. So now they just don't give a crap about this stuff anymore. I mean, what's the other example of a game last year that EA completely botched? Immortals of Avium, right? That was a game where the game had all the signs of being a good game, but it was completely mishandled, mismanaged, mismarketed. No one knew the game was coming out, and they released it the same fucking time as Baldur's Gate 3 and acted like it was going to do well. Like, again, whose fault is this? It's EA's fault. It's the management at EA that don't know what the hell they're doing. So they spend all this time and money on this new original IP. They completely botch its launch, and then they say, oh, you see, no one wants single-player games. Keep pumping out live service Ultimate Team transaction games. No, EA, your managers are terrible and need to be fired. Just like the people in charge of Ubisoft are terrible and they need to be fired. And the people in charge of Activision Blizzard are terrible and they need to be fired. And Phil Spencer is a horrible leader for Xbox and he needs to be fired. All the people in charge right now of gaming are terrible. They're all making completely the wrong decisions. All of them. And the industry is in a downturn. You're the reason. You're the ones in charge of the industry. It's not us that determine the industry. It's you. You make the games. So if you're not making the good games that people will go out and spend money on, whose fault is that exactly? The consumers or yours? You're in charge. You're dropping the ball and you're blaming the consumers for it. Right? Like, it's our fault the Dead Space remake only sold 1 million copies. What? How is it our fault? It's our fault Immortals of Avium flopped. You didn't even market the game. No one even knew it existed, and you released it at Baldur's Gate 3's release week. Are you stupid? Yes, you are. You're the reason that gaming is so bad now. Gamers don't want gaming to just be endless microtransactions. We don't. But that's what we're being shilled on now. It's what's being pushed down our throat because this is all that will make them money because they don't make good games anymore. Right? It's sad. Somehow it's our fault because, I don't know, well, because we're demanding better games. We're not just happy with the crap you're pumping out. It's like, I just don't understand it, you know? And the other thing that's funny, again, with this industry, people tend to fail up. And what I mean that is, oh, your company made absolutely awful decisions. Stay in charge anyway, right? Or leave that company and go to another company. The Don Matrick story, right? Don Matrick was in charge of the Xbox One launch. The Xbox One was infamously one of the worst console launches in history. His cocky attitude, his demeanor, the way he said things disrespectfully to the consumer turned people off. So people did not buy the Xbox One at launch. He left Microsoft to become in charge of a mobile games company called Zynga. He failed up. And guess what happened at Zynga? They tanked under his leadership and he had to leave there too, but he got a big payout. This is what I mean. Like, these people in charge of these companies, there's like no repercussions for anything they do. They make mistake after mistake. They don't listen to feedback. They don't listen to market research. They just do what they want and then they blame the consumer, but yet somehow they're still in power and they're still millionaires and they're still receiving kickbacks. How does that happen exactly? Right? Typically, if you own a business and it's doing poorly, you don't get money. But somehow these companies are rolling in profits either from their past successes or from microtransactions from shitty games that they still fucking get away with it and they never have any repercussions for these choices. It's like, ah! I just don't get it. I don't understand it. And the industry will continue to be on this pace of errors, flops, unfinished releases, terrible games until we get new people in power. These people who are in charge are either relics of the industry or just don't understand it, right? Like Yves Guillemot, his time was done 15 years ago. He should have been ousted a million years ago, right? Thank God we got rid of Bobby Kotick over at Activision. I mean, that guy was out of touch for the longest time. So thankfully he's gone. But now you're like, oh, well, guess what? Now there really is no one in charge. It's a fucking Phil Spencer. It's like, oh, God. You're the ultimate bro salesman who doesn't fucking understand the industry.
Every shot, nigga. Everything dead.
I don't know, man. This whole EA shenanigan thing here with the Dead Space remake is like, so now you got all of our hopes up for a Dead Space franchise coming back, and because it didn't sell 1 billion copies, that's it. Dead Space is dead forever now because of you. It's like because of you. Not because of the consumers, because of you. You know? Maybe if you actually did innovate the game, which they didn't. They did not innovate with the Dead Space remake. They added a few new things. Everything else is exactly the same as the first game. Maybe if you actually did really remake it rather than just kind of giving it a facelift, it sold more. But you didn't. You took the easy way out, and you expect that this is going to be like a zillion seller. Well, that's not how it works anymore in the industry, you know? Anyway, I rest my case. I can't make these companies be intelligent, nor can I make their leadership do their jobs well. All I can do is report on it. Okay. No.